The rock and roll world is bringing me down. I'm gonna head on back to my little town.
I'm gonna set a timer. This time slot is 30 minutes. I'm gonna go for 25. That's my target.
I've been up, I've been down. Never pennies, but I made a
So I'm gonna
pound.
set a timer as well, so I know when 25 minutes is up. So this is quite a historic moment, actually. Today is a practice talk for the Eurographics 2019 conference. And it represents basically the last foundational step of kind of a 10-year, 10-ish year kind of project. And I'll explain that during the talk. But this is the continuation of something that started more than 10 years ago. So it's really unusual. It's a special occasion. And the actual talk will be given at the Eurographics conference next week in Genova, Italy. So, and it happens to be very timely because Carlo is working on a survey, Elif is working on a survey, and Wong is working on a survey. So that's also a nice kind of aspect. So it's called How to Write a Survey Paper, a Starting Point, together with McNabb. I think some of you have seen something like this before, if you pay very, very careful attention to some other talks. Give a man a fish, you have fed him for today. Teach a man to fish, and you have fed him for a lifetime. That's the spirit behind the message today. Providing a starting point for writing a literature survey in the topic of data visualization. So it is meant to serve as the starting point as opposed to an ending point. And if anybody's ever tried, you'll know that writing survey papers is very difficult. Visualization survey papers. Not just visualization survey papers, just all survey papers are difficult. And you don't see many guidelines and instructions on scientific survey papers. They do exist. No guidelines exist necessarily for starting a visualization survey paper. There are some that are scientific oriented, but they're not as helpful as they could be. And there are many. If you type literature survey guidelines into Google, you find many, like thousands of hits, but they're mostly geared towards arts and humanities, the social sciences, and other things. Certainly not based, and not many on science itself. And they're not necessarily a step-by-step guide on how to start the process. This is not meant to be a substitute for an experienced or an advisor. I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to write a survey without an experienced advisor. And the way this is organized is we describe the process section by section, what each part of the survey contains. This is an overview of the paper itself. And it also is kind of an overview of the talk, but you can see it contains a lot of topics. So actually we don't think we'll have time to cover all these topics in the 25-minute slot. We'll go through as many as we can, but I don't imagine we'll be able to cover all those topics. So there'll be that's what the PDF paper is for, to go into more detail on all those different topics. Now, the historic aspect of this is the PhD in Visualization Starter Kit. This is one of the pieces of the PhD in Visualization Starter Kit, and that's that's the project that started more than 10 years ago, actually. And I have had people come to me and say, when are you going to publish the how to write a survey paper? I have had people ask me this question. And this audience knows about the PhD in Visualization Starter Kit. But for the Eurographics audience, they might be seeing it for the first time. It has the different steps, how to conduct effective meetings, how to read individual research papers. This is step 2, not done in chronological order, obviously. But step 2 of the PBSK, the new step 2, is how to write a survey paper. Step 3 is about implementation of your ideas. Step 4 is very advanced skills on how to debug your implementations for very large data sets. And then step 5 is also quite advanced, how to write. So this is part of the PBSK. And there is a video accompaniment to this topic. So a lot of these topics have been recorded in lectures and are available on YouTube for anybody that prefers the video style of learning. Maybe, and these are all supplementary, kind of complementary videos to all these topics, with a few extra topics thrown in, like Tableau and using visual media and so on. Okay, by the way, if there are questions or comments, it's okay to interrupt at any time. It's absolutely no problem. The abstract. So a survey paper could start by writing an abstract. It doesn't have to start that way. Anybody want to guess what the best place to start for writing a survey is, actually? That's one option. The step 0.
Classification?
I would say that's not step 0. Step 1 could be related work. That's very close. It could be the abstract.
Scope.
Scope is early. I wouldn't call it step 0. Aleph is the closest so far.
I mean, the introduction.
Yeah. The question is not very, is not formulated. It's searching for existing surveys. So if you have a survey idea, you have to find out if it's already published. So that's step 0, which you kind of hinted at, the related work. But after you found out that the survey you're interested in is either not published or it's significantly old enough that you could republish it up to date, that's an option then. You can also write an abstract. So the job of the abstract is to identify the survey topic, not too shocking. Describe why it's interesting, why is the field that you're studying interesting, and why is it useful. You identify the goals of the literature review, for example, providing an overview of the related literature, identifying mature and immature areas of research, identifying unsolved problems, comparing papers. And you state the benefits and advantages that your survey brings. Right? It has to bring some benefits in a survey. So typically it's good for beginners to the field that want a first overview, and it's good for experienced researchers as well because it provides directions for future work. So it helps everybody keep up with the massive volume of literature. And we do provide a sample abstract in the manuscript, the how-to manuscript, and I just, for the fun of it, went back and counted the number of sentences, and it's 7 sentences. That's a very rough guideline. The introduction is also a good early phase aspect of writing your survey. The manuscript itself, the PDF, goes into more detail about things like when to write different sections, what order they could be written in, and it goes into more detail about planning. I've left some of that detail out due to time limitations in this, and just to simplify the presentation a little bit. The introduction really is, the word introduction is not very useful. Like, if you think about it, you could just cross out that word and you wouldn't lose anything. you want, when you write the introduction, you want the word motivation. It should be called motivation. Like, what is the reason you're writing this survey and you're working on this survey? What is this survey good for? Why is the topic important? And what benefits does the survey bring, and what are the advantages? You want to include somewhere in your introduction, probably near the end, a bulleted list of your contributions. What does the survey contribute to the scientific community, the visualization community? And it's very good to have to mention the major research challenges in the field that you chose. Right? Every field has special research challenges, and I would say it's good to have a subsection in the introduction called field challenges or something like that. But it could also just be a paragraph hiding in the introduction somewhere. You know, common challenges are the growing size of data sets, very generic challenge that affects everybody. Uncertainty is a very common challenge. Heterogeneous data sources are very common challenges nowadays. These are just some examples. Cognition and perception is always a challenge, at least in our lifetime. Existing limitations, performance is almost always a challenge lurking somewhere in some aspects. Those are just some ideas of very, very common challenges, and you would make them more specific. You know, you would take those generic ideas and make them more specific. I put a hint in there that jumps ahead in the talk, and this is a candidate classification dimension, a very common candidate classification dimension, which we're going to talk about. And the PDF gives an example introduction for a survey. About the contributions, because these are so important, they deserve their own slide. And this isn't true just about surveys, actually. This is true about all papers. You really want to make it clear to the reader what you think the contributions are. I'm reviewing a paper now that I look at it and I'm like, what are the contributions? And I don't predict the paper is going to get published in its current form because of exactly this kind of question. Like, it's difficult to look at the paper and identify the contributions. So may as well not have that problem. So you want to identify your contributions in a bulleted list. Here are some very common ideas for literature survey contributions. Does your literature survey provide a new classification of some sort? That is a contribution. Is it the first survey of its kind? That's a very nice contribution. Or is it an updated version of a very outdated survey? That's a good contribution too. It's not as exciting, but it's still very valuable. Does it identify trends or things that are not very well developed, immature aspects of research? So does it identify areas that a lot of people have paid attention to and areas that everyone has overlooked or most people have overlooked? And so you want to have, I would sort of argue that you want 3-ish contributions. That's always a number that sticks in my head, like it's nice to have 3 contributions in all of your papers. What does the reader potentially gain from this survey? That is a question that you want the contributions to answer. On the time aspect, so I think it's good to allocate a 10 years. 10 years to write a survey. A year-ish to write a survey. That's what I would recommend, not full-time, but part-time. I have worked on surveys full-time before. When I was a PhD student, I worked on a survey like for at least a month, just that full-time. It is brutal. But I would prefer a part-time style, incrementally over the time span of about 1 year. A lot of the time is spent on searching for the related literature, because it's hard to find everything, generally speaking. It's going to be a lot easier after you see this presentation, but it is difficult. And one of the reasons is just because a full-length survey is typically 20 to 30 pages. And you don't want to write 20 pages and then give it to somebody for review. No, you want to write 2 pages and give it to somebody for review to get feedback incrementally, or 1 page. You don't want to try to write 20 pages and say, here's a first draft, and then have the reviewer say, start over. Like, that's not a good idea. And individual research papers can be summarized on a weekly basis. That's a nice way to incrementally make progress on a survey, and that's covered, that topic is covered in a different talk in a different paper. That is step 1 of the PBSK, I believe. Okay, here are 7 big challenges of writing a survey. Managing the amount of previously published literature. So step 1 of the PBSK goes into more detail just on this special topic. Identifying a starting point, where do I start, is a major challenge, right? And that's what this talk itself addresses in some ways. Deciding on a topic. That's related to scope, and that's described a lot in section 1.5. Performing a literature search itself is a big challenge. That's addressed in the search methodology section in 1.3. Interpreting individual research papers. That's described in section 3.1 of the big PDF and here in step 1 of the PBSK. Deriving a literature classification, definitely a major challenge. We describe that in section 3.2. And then determining the unsolved problems and future challenges is a major challenge. And we discussed that in section 5. And the question is how far are we going to get today? That's amazing. Time accelerates when you're giving a presentation. I feel like I'm going pretty fast, but according to my clock here, I'm going kind of slow. So the literature search methodology is where do you search for your PDFs and your related literature. Here's a nice list that we've compiled that can be used for any visualization survey. You have your 3 digital libraries, at least 3 of them. And then you have the VizPub data source, which is the list of all previously published Viz papers. You have Euroviz, the TVCG journal. These are the actual venues where people like to publish their related research papers. I do put down ACM computing surveys because it's a special journal just for surveys, but I don't know if there's a Viz survey published there. I don't recall it's even a single Viz survey published there, actually. And of course, you want to identify the literature search terms that you used in your literature search methodology subsection, you want to describe it in enough detail so that it's reproducible. And of course, you check the individual paper references. During this process, you look carefully at the number of papers published on your topic. If you are looking and you're searching all this and you're finding thousands of papers on your topic, there's a problem. You don't want to find, it means your scope is too broad and you need to get it narrower. So scope, major challenge, as Alif can attest. But everybody's experienced, or almost everybody's experienced this. Deciding on the scope, for example, how much breadth does your topic cover and how much depth does it cover? Where are the borders to what's included and what's not included, what's excluded, which papers are in and which papers are out. That's something that you need to discuss very carefully with a supervisor or somebody that's more experienced at this. My basic recommendations are choose a scope that you think is too narrow to start with. It's much easier to choose something narrow and then open it up than it is to start too broad and then narrow it down. Do a preliminary search. When you do your preliminary search, like in the literature browsing section, how many papers are you finding? You can get a feel for how many papers you're finding quickly. It doesn't take a year. You can find out in just a week or something. Like you could say, oh look, I searched for a week and I already found 1,000 papers. That's an alarm bell. It means your scope is too broad. A guideline I like is to try to aim for 20 to 25 papers initially. Like I found 20 to 25 papers on this topic in my first attempt at searching. And when you search for longer periods of time, you always find more. And a nice guideline is to try to have something like 50-ish papers in your survey per student supervisor pair. This assumes that you're a PhD candidate and you're working with a supervisor. If it's just the two of you, you want to shoot, like 50 is a nice guideline. You can do bigger surveys if you have multiple student supervisor pairs working in a team. Yeah. And like I mentioned in the beginning, don't forget to search for existing surveys. And this is a section that is included in the survey. It's called scope, survey scope. What's in and what's not in. Another major challenge is the literature classification, developing a literature classification. So a classification groups related papers, closely related papers together. So if papers are closely related, they're found in the same subsection of your classification. And if they're distant, they're found in different categories. These are the papers that can be compared to one another. Now the subcategories are often based on subtopics, reoccurring themes, data or metadata attributes. Very, very common ways to find classifications. So when you're developing a classification, some questions you want to ask systematically are, what are the themes that keep reoccurring? Because that usually happens. Some themes keep reoccurring over and over again. Are there subjects? Are there natural subject-based clusters? Because that's the way the academic community sort of thinks. They think in terms of subjects, and they tend to be in some subject, like multivariate graphs just tends to be, people just tend to cluster somehow topic related naturally, organically. We do cite in the PDF a number of software tools that can help with this. So you start to collect your papers, and the software tools help you with different subjects that reoccur, and it does that in a semi-automatic fashion. What are some of the characteristics that most, if not all, of the papers you search for have in common? That's another question you want to ask yourself. So are they looking at the same data type, or are they looking at different data types? Because the characteristics of your data is a very common categorization, classification, or dimension. Very, very common. We like to, oh, there's 25 minutes, that's amazing. Okay, so I'll make a little note. I've got my slide 14, 25 minutes. I guess I'll finish, I'll go for another 10 minutes or something and finish, since I don't have that strict 25-minute limit. But we'll have to figure out ways to address that. So, identifying classification dimensions, we advocate classifications that are more than just one-dimensional. So a list of subjects or a list of categories, that's a one-dimensional classification, and that's the most common classification, by the way. But we advocate two-dimensional classifications, like this one. It has a y-axis and an x-axis. Most are just the y-axis, for example, and they leave out the x-axis. You can test out different dimensions and then just see, okay, I'm going to start putting the papers in that two-dimensional classification. How easy or difficult is it? Is it impossible to to take a paper and just put it in a bucket? If it's easy, then probably you have a good classification. If it's extremely difficult, the more difficult it is, probably the worse your classification is. This one is a 3D classification because it includes color too. So it's always possible to add color, that third dimension, on there. You experiment with text analysis tools as well if you want to come up with objective classifications and groups. You can experiment with concordances or document similarity metrics if you actually want to measure different categories of text and how closely related they are to each other. Some candidate directions are subjects, recurring subjects, data dimensionality, very, very common. Visualization technique used. Visual design dimensionality, the field challenge I mentioned from slide 2 or something like that. The user task, that's supposed to say task type. The application domain, so visualization often addresses a special application domain. That's definitely a candidate for a dimension, classification dimension. The data set size that's being processed, definitely a candidate. Performance time, runtime, definitely a candidate. Data types and field of view, all candidates for dimensions. I think this slide is not as vital as all the other slides, as some of the other slides, but I'll just mention it briefly. These are just some examples of two-dimensional classifications, and in this top half, all the papers, these are papers, the L's, and these are classification dimensions, the D's. This is a unique mapping, it's called. So every piece of literature fits in exactly one category, period. That doesn't appear multiple times. In the bottom half, it's a variation of the top, but the mapping is 1 to n. In other words, a same piece of literature can appear in more than one dimension. I prefer the top one because it clearly points to unsolved problems. Like unsolved problems are the empty buckets, basically. This is just another example of a literature classification. It's the same, it's a unique mapping, right, along it uses some of those same principles we mentioned. On the y-axis is data type, or data dimensionality, 2D, 3D, static, time dependent, and on the x-axis is subject category. And then the color identifies field challenges, the challenge in the physical sciences, the visualization of physical sciences that is addressed by the paper. For example, time-dependent visualization is a field challenge, right? Multi-field visualization is a classic field challenge. So you can have a three-dimensional categorization. Here's another one. These are not mind-blowing classifications. They're not really that creative because they just use data dimensionality as an axis, but they're extremely helpful nonetheless. Right? What's so great is if you're doing FlowViz, for example, well, guess what? You don't want to work on this one. Like, don't work on that problem. That's this already a lot of work. You may as well work on something like this, or here, in some area where there's less work done. Another critical aspect of a survey is to compare papers with one another. How do you systematically compare a collection of papers or of individual papers with one another? And that's done with metadata. So you can collect metadata on each paper and use it to compare the papers, and that's an essential aspect of the surveys. And this is just some examples of collective metadata that can be used to compare the papers with each other and help the readers. Because a very common criticism of survey papers is this is just a list of papers. Reviewers expect a meta-analysis, a comparison of the papers, something in addition that helps the reader. So publication year, for example, a histogram, so many survey papers have a nice histogram of just which year the papers were published in to look for special trends over time. Publication venue is also very, very popular. Like, where are the papers being published, in which conferences, which journals. The origin of the data, like where does the data come from? Very, very common. Number of citations is a possibility. The year span of the literature is a possibility. The evaluation methods used in the literature is another possibility. And this might also sound like classification dimensions. It's because it can overlap with class. These can also be used in some ways as some of them make good classification dimensions. Author relationships, test result comparisons, task types. These are all different dimensions and metadata that can be used to compare groups of papers with one another. And there are more examples down here. Any unused classification dimensions. So some of these aspects may have featured in your discussion of what the classification itself. Like visual designs used, the data set size being processed, the data characteristics. So there's redundancies here. You can see keywords. The pipeline classification, that refers to the visualization pipeline, and so on. So those are all different aspects that can be used, that can be metadata aspects that can be used to enhance your survey and compare the papers with each other. This is just one example. This is an example based on the related work. Looking at the related work and how how papers are related to one another. So each node represents a paper. So that's the original line integral convolution paper. And then its successor papers. So a curvilinear one, a fast, and then all the other variants. And then there were lots of grandchildren. These are all LIC grandchildren, so to speak. So they're 2 generations later, so a lot of variants of the fast LIC algorithm. So that's how the papers relate to one another. And then there's a dimensionality aspect to all the papers, another aspect. And that provides a nice overview and comparison of all the LIC papers in one image. Okay, I'll just quickly mention there are a number of tools for literature classification to help in curation, like the surveys tool. Wong pointed out the Mendeley tool, and there are a few more cited in this PDF. There are like 2 or 3 more if anybody's interested in having a look at them. So I think you could spend a lot of time just trying to figure out all the tools. Future challenges. This might get problem. I can imagine this slide not fitting into the talk. But if you've developed a nice 2D classification scheme, it's easier to identify future challenges. This is a critical aspect of surveys. A reviewer or a reader wants to see, okay, what are the open and unsolved problems and the future challenges in this field? It's basically a requirement. And how do you get that information out? You look at the future work section of individual papers. That's one aspect. You look for reoccurring future work themes, because you'll always find reoccurring themes. You can build a concordance, which means you have all the reoccurring themes and you rank them in terms of their popularity. You look at the classification table for crowded areas, dense areas, and then empty areas, and you can just talk to people, talk to experts and ask them, what do you think are the unsolved problems? That's just a little slide that says this is what your survey could look like to start with. Here are the different subsections. And here are some of the papers that we've referenced in the talk. And that's the end. Thank you for listening. Okay, so I didn't write down how much extra time I used actually.
I think you started about 5 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe like 10 minutes or something.
yeah, just a bit.
Okay. That's amazing how quickly the time, I think it's because I'm such a slow speaker. But I don't prefer like trying to just talk fast.
And trying to reduce some of the slides.
Excuse me?
I said if you don't want to speed up, then try to reduce them.
Yeah, I'll have to cut out some of the slides. Or just say, okay, I'm out of time, and that's where we stop.
I think you can save a good few minutes on the intro.
Mm-hmm.
I think the intro you kind of have to explain, the difference between audiences and things, which is stuff that you will not have to do there. But there's probably at least 3 minutes there that you could have trimmed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Part of the intro is just me saying, look, I know I'm gonna run out of time, and here is where you can look for future reference when you want to come back to this material. You know, that's kind of the spirit in a little bit in the introduction, like, yeah. Comments or questions or anything like that? Omnia, do you have questions, comments?
Maybe like if you reuse part of the introduction, because it will be much more interesting to see the tools and what you talk like later in the middle of the presentation, like the scope and so on. This is much more important to hear. But I like the way that like you say some stuff and then you said if you want more, then look to the paper. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember when you did this at the postgraduate thing, that was a full hour.
That's right, yeah.
So now you got a quarter of the time.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I can say that. Maybe I can say like I have a recorded version of this that's
Yeah.
a full hour
Yeah.
if anybody's interested. That was partially the spirit behind the introduction as well, but I didn't say it explicitly. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe what would be nice if the introduction could be like a slide with link to the PVSK, the talk, and the paper, and then just basically give a brief summary of, 25 minutes worth of summary of the talk itself, like a concise version so that anybody can, because I don't know, I personally prefer having a complete thing that is less detailed rather than a lot of detail but an incomplete thing.
Yeah, yeah. I understand.
I will tend to actually, if I actually grab the paper, I will tend to look at the sections I've heard during the talk and maybe ignore the ones I haven't heard of,
Mm-hmm.
even though,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, this might be me, but
I remember the slide that you talk about the sections, like each topic in which section. I don't think the people will remember like the sections or the numbers, but if you say, for example, some of the topics that will be covered in the paper then, because like saying the numbers, no one will like keep tracking what's the
That's
number
true.
of
That's true.
for the sections for that, but if you specify that like the content that will be covered, then I think they will remember that.
I could even like color code the overview slide and say this is what we'll talk about and here's the stuff we leave out for time purposes. You know, that would be a possibility, perhaps.
it's a cool talk, I like it.
It's a fun topic, and it's surprising how difficult it is to squeeze it into 25 minutes. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised myself. I thought I would get further in that time. Because when you imagine it in your head, you imagine talking fast and zipping through.
The problem is you don't get nervous anymore, otherwise you would be talking faster. If you were still getting nervous, you would have done it in 10.
Yeah.
You're too comfortable.
Therefore, Liam should give the talk.
And 5 cups of coffee before you start. Just get your heart racing. Imagine everybody fully clothed and you in underwear on stage. I don't know, just do the opposite of what everybody says. and worry yourself.
Yeah. Any comments on like the slides themselves? The slides are a little bit too text oriented, a little bit.
Yeah, but it is also a summary of how to write a survey paper. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not that many images you can actually... like, unless you put
a hammer and a nail, a pen, like...
Yeah, with the hands together and the guy in the suit shaking hand, and like you can do a search for stock images, but yeah, exactly, but you're not like...
Yeah, yeah.
I got a couple of like pedantic things that Liam
Okay.
usually picks up.
Good.
You have an inconsistency in like some
The
of the bullet
bullets.
points have full stops, others don't.
Okay.
Oh wow, I didn't even know
As
that.
Liam loves to pick up on these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So
I do tend to pick up on that when I'm
You got
not.
least real big shoes to fill.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Alignments?
Yeah, like you can see it in the paragraph there. You know, the first line is off, and I think on
You mean here?
yeah,
You know what? Like
it's not too bad there.
like PowerPoint just does stuff, and I don't know why, but that's one of the things.
Yeah.
It just does indentation.
Oh, because PowerPoint is great. I love it.
It looks a bit weirder on like slide 13 and 14, I think
Wow.
specifically.
Yeah.
It has
Oh my
Very
God.
strange. Like there, it's inconsistent too, and I have no idea why. I just
Yeah.
like cut and paste references,
like there as well.
and I don't know why.
Yeah.
It just like maybe the bullet style or something. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is.
It's a bit of a you could,
Okay, so 13 and 14 you mentioned.
yeah. So yeah, there you can see the first one's off.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're not too bad with the points. Oh yes, the software tools can help. So bullet points. Full stop.
There is, I think, one of the slides also, the text was on the line, so
Yeah.
it wasn't clear.
Slide
yes,
12.
Yes,
the one
that is where. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
this
right.
one.
Yeah, yep. I noticed that myself.
I clearly wasn't paying that much attention to slides. I didn't realize it with the way it's said on that.
Yeah, the full stop thing is usually something I notice myself,
Oh, you always pick it up in my summaries, so.
but I was going as fast as possible
I
with
figured
this
you
as
would
well,
have been. Yeah.
trying hard to finish it in time. The full stops aren't too bad though,
No.
actually.
It was only those two slides, 13 and 14. Yeah, the first paragraph, they kind of line up more consistently.
Yeah, that one, it looks normal. Nobody noticed the bullets themselves are inconsistent.
Yeah,
Yes.
change.
I'm not like, okay, they're really inconsistent. I don't care enough, I think, to make the bullets all perfectly consistent. At least they're okay on this slide. Hmm.
You got the paper, you got the image of the paper on the first page as well, is it? It's a different.
It is a
image.
different one. That's the how to write of his research paper.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not the survey paper. That's an artifact of if I have time, I'll update.
Yeah.
So that is. But did you notice that
Oh, the
when
image.
you were in the audience just watching?
Yeah, because it's got the Eurographics logo on top of it.
So you noticed that this is not the correct. Did you notice that
Oh
that's
no, I
not
didn't know if it was in the correct one. I didn't
Okay.
look close enough.
Okay,
actually.
that would be very observant to say, oh, he's got the wrong paper there.
Yeah.
Like,
You could literally put a red cross on it and say survey results.
yeah, there's only one word
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. I didn't notice that, no. But, I guess it says Computer Graphics Forum on it as well, actually, doesn't it? So,
Yeah, that one's Computer Graphics Forum, yeah. It's got the quote on there as well.
oh yeah. Same one.
Yes, that's true. Maybe I'll update that one.
To be fair, it would take 3 seconds.
Seems you got the photo in the other side of the picture on the other side, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
You got the outdated Swansea University logo.
Yes, I do. I have the outdated Swansea. This is the super outdated.
That's the University of Wales, is it?
I don't know, actually. But that's the super outdated. That's like
Yeah.
3 or 4 generations back. I still like it. That's why I still use it. I like this one better than this one.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's, you know, this is probably outdated too now or something.
Yeah, I should say computation foundry or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Maybe, or...
Yeah. But that's an artifact of like reusing the old one, but and then not being motivated enough to change it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other major things? We don't have to go on for long periods of time. I hope Liam appreciates me doing this. That's a lot to ask. It's very high.
Is there any sign of when Liam would like to get his examination?
No, still, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of admin, and I'm waiting on a form to be approved. There's an approval form of the examiners
Oh, yeah.
and the chair, and I'm just waiting on that.
How long could that take then?
It can take a day, or it can take a month.
No,
You just never know. Yeah.
Who have you recommended?
Edmund Prakash is his name. The external. Cardiff Metropolitan University.
I've been a loser and a legend and I can't carry someone insane. Oh, I've been in, I've been far, with a worn out harp at an old
Edmund and I actually have quite a long history. So we
I got nothing left to prove.